When they close the lid on a man like David Allan Coe, they are not just closing it on a singer. They are closing it on 60 years of outlaw philosophy, on a man who lived exactly the way he said he would live, who made the music he wanted to make, who said the things Nashville told him not to say, who parked a hearse outside the Grand Ole Opry and slept in it because he had nowhere else to go, and turned even that into part of the legend. David Allan Coe died on Wednesday, April 29, 2026, in an intensive care unit. He was 86 years old. No official funeral arrangements have been announced. His wife Kimberly and the family are still in the most private, most overwhelming days of grief, making arrangements for a man who was larger than life for 6 decades, and who now needs to be laid to rest by the people who loved him in the quiet rooms that nobody ever photographed. But the open casket, when it comes, will hold something that country music has never had quite like him. And what that casket represents is a story worth telling in full. Let's start at the beginning, because the man in that casket grew up in a way that most country music fans only know in the abstract. Born September 6, 1939 in Akron, Ohio, sent to a reform school by the age of 9, spent the next 2 decades cycling in and out of juvenile and adult correctional facilities, including 3 years at the Ohio State Penitentiary. He was released from prison in 1967. He was 27 years old. He had spent more of his life inside institutions than outside them. And he drove straight to Nashville. Not to clean himself up, not to apologize for who he was, to find his people, to find the music that matched the life he had actually lived, not the sanitized, radio-friendly version that the industry was selling in 1967. The real version, with the rough edges left exactly where they were. He parked a hearse outside the Grand Ole Opry and called it home. He wore a cape. He wore a skull ring. He walked onto stages in outfits that made Nashville clutch its pearls, and then opened his mouth and sang something so true that the pearl clutching stopped and the listening started. Because here is the paradox of David Allan Coe. The man who looked the most like trouble was writing some of the most emotionally precise songs in the history of country music. He wrote "Take This Job and Shove It," not just a catchy title, a genuine working-class anthem, the kind of song that punches a clock every day and finally says what the hands have been thinking for years. Johnny Paycheck recorded it. It became #1, and every person who has ever fantasized about walking away from a job they hate has felt it in their chest. He wrote "Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone" for Tanya Tucker. She was 13 when she recorded it. It was #1, a song with biblical imagery and an aching romantic gravity, written by a man who had spent years inside prison walls and knew exactly what devotion under impossible circumstances looked like. He was the first to record Tennessee Whiskey, before George Jones, before Chris Stapleton turned it into a decade-defining performance. David Allan Coe recorded it first, and almost nobody knew. That is the David Allan Coe legacy in one sentence. He was there first. He did it first. And somebody else got the credit while he stood outside the frame with a skull ring and a cape and a grin that said, "I know exactly what I did." And then there is The Ride, the song that is now impossible to hear the same way, a hitchhiker on a road from Montgomery to Nashville, a ghost in the seat beside him, the ghost of Hank Williams asking whether this new stranger had what it takes, whether he had suffered enough to sing country music, whether the pain was real or performed. It was real. Nobody who spent their childhood in reform school and their young adult years in the Ohio State Penitentiary was performing anything. He had earned every note of every song he ever wrote with the specific currency that country music requires above all others. The truth of a hard life, and the willingness to say it out loud. But wait, let me ask you something. Have you ever stood at an open casket and felt the full weight of who a person was, not the legend, not the stories, but the actual human being who was complicated and flawed and brilliant and damaged and generous and impossible all at the same time. Because that is what the people who love David Allan Coe will face when they gather. Not the outlaw, not the man who slept in the hearse, not the author of Take This Job and Shove It, but the father who disowned one daughter, the man whose son Tyler dropped out of high school at 14 to go on the road with him and was fired without explanation years later and never spoke to him again, the husband who Kimberly called her confidant in her life and her friend. All of those people were in the same body, and all of them will be present in that casket, because death does not edit anyone. It holds the whole complicated truth of a life and asks the people standing around it to hold it too. His daughter Tanya woke up and found out on social media that her father was dead. She asked strangers on the internet to tell her when the funeral would be because nobody had called her. Nobody had told her. Nobody had given her the chance to say goodbye. That wound will not be healed by a beautiful service. It will not be closed by an open casket or a hymn or a eulogy that focuses on the songs and leaves out the silences. Because Tanya Montana Coe knows the silences. She lived inside them. And the man in that casket is responsible for them, alongside all the songs, alongside all the brilliance. The silence and the brilliance came from the same source, a man who spent his whole life refusing to be managed or softened or told what he was allowed to be. That is both the gift and the cost of an outlaw life, and the people who loved him are now living inside both. His wife Kimberly said, "My husband, my friend, my confidant, and my life for many years." His manager confirmed that a posthumous album may be released on what would have been his 87th birthday, September 6, 2026. One final record, because even in death, David Allan Coe is not finished making music. He was the first to record Tennessee Whiskey. He wrote the perfect country song. He rode beside Hank's ghost on a highway from Montgomery to Nashville. He slept in a hearse because he had nothing else and turned it into mythology. He spent 20 years in institutions. He spent 60 years in the music. He gave his best songs away to other people's careers without complaint. He said what Nashville told him not to say. He wore what Nashville told him not to wear. He was exactly who he said he was, from the first night outside the Grand Ole Opry to the last night in the intensive care unit in Tennessee. The open casket will hold all of that. The man, the outlaw, the father, the songwriter, the contradiction, the whole complicated, irreplaceable truth. Rest in peace, David Allan Coe. September 6, 1939, April 29, 2026. The long hard ride is finally over. Thank you for watching.